So let's open it up to Q&A and our panelists. Dan Kieser, as I mentioned, is a fellow analyst at ARC. Kevin Price is with Hexagon and brings expertise in the asset performance management domain. And Jake Leidick is with iBot Aerial Solutions, which relates to the remote drone sensing capabilities and VR, AI, ML that Sean Murphy from Shell had mentioned with that great discussion he gave us. Thank you, users and panelists. Excellent. We have the exact number of seats needed. Perfect. Yes.
I got a question for Sean. Yeah, this is about sustainability reporting, right? One of the things you talk about drones is you're bringing the facility to the SMEs instead of sending the SMEs to the facility. How do we take credit for that, right? How do we take credit for the avoidance of the flight cost and carbon footprint? I mean, I work for Chevron. I did some research on a project. We spent $37 million on one project just with Chevron travel alone to the construction site during construction. How do we take credit for the avoidance of the carbon and the cost when we do these kinds of exercises?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, but I can tell you I don't know how your travel system works, but I can tell you that when I click on a flight, I know exactly how much carbon I am emitting by on that flight. So we capture all of that data. And so when we don't travel and we don't make those trips, we do try to capture that cost avoidance or that avoidance. Yep.
Because that's the hard part. It's easy to track expenditures.
Absolutely.
It's difficult to track things you didn't do.
So when we put together our use case for the drone work that we've done, part of it was the travel cost avoidance, but also we included the carbon avoidance as well when we internally put that together.
There is a calculator too for you guys. It's sponsored by the ICAO. And you can go through and put in your destinations and your class, and it'll give you a carbon footprint for your travel.
Yeah.
Pretty cool little tool.
That's excellent.
I would just add to that employee travel is included in Scope 3 emissions, but it is a little dicey to compare Scope 3 emissions year to year because people, like companies, are aggressively trying to refine that baseline, and so you can't necessarily compare Scope 3 emissions from the same company year to year, but it is included.
And for me, it's more like the business case for doing the drone flights, right?
That's right.
Selling it to my management, saying, hey, I need $50,000 to do these drone flights, and here's how it's going to impact our cost and our carbon footprint, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Well, I'd like to ask the audience a question. When you look at your company's environmental health and safety software usage or your tools that you're using to do your annual CSR and sustainability report, and where you're going potentially with environmental, social, and corporate governance software, ESG, are you looking at it from building on a foundation of something you have already, like an ERP or an EAM, or have you gone off, or you're about to go out and buy an ESG software solution? Are you adapting your EHS solution? Are you still using in-house tools? I don't know if we just want to have like an open conversation about it rather than a show of hands, but anyone want to comment on how their environment is evolving? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Jesse Cerruti, I work for Pfizer.
Mike's going to bring you a microphone. The mic from Mike.
You did not need one.
You got the chops.
Hello again, Jesse Cerruti. I work for Pfizer. I lead the EHS digital solutions team, and so I can kind of speak to that a little bit. I'm living this right now, which is ESG is considering EHS part of their data set, right? So what is happening now is we are now a major component or major data feed into the overall ESG strategy, but there appears to be a separate, kind of reporting solution that's happening from an EHS perspective, from an ESG perspective that might be different than the annual EHS reporting that's happening now. That might change or not change depending on how the regulations end up shaking out this year. But, that's part of the puzzle for us.
And thank you for that. And so the capabilities to improve the performance of an operation is different from reporting on it. And how do you see that shaking out? Is that just separate, or is it like?
Oh no, that's actually a completely separate area, right? So when you talk about the actual operations, there's a separate team looking at how you can optimize like the scope 1, right? So scope 1 optimization is more on the engineering side, right? Because they're really more connected with the equipment. And then there's the EHS component, which is really more focused on the overall macro output of the facilities and the general reporting. But so that even in itself is also separate.
So engineering versus operations versus,
EHS
Yeah,
versus ESG, lots of
Excellent.
different groups in play.
super helpful. And I don't want you to name vendors, but what are you also seeing in terms of perhaps enterprise software solutions that you already had in place, like your traditional financial reporting, your ERP, your work management or enterprise asset management, your MES? I mean,
We're
is it-
seeing that every software vendor wants to get in on it, but we're not really sure that most can do it yet.
there's a real estate grab almost, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's this interesting mentality, right? But who's got the chops to actually,
Yeah, everyone's scrambling to make sure
Yeah.
to see if they can meet the needs. Yeah.
interesting, perfect, that's what we're seeing too, yeah. So, another aspect of it is that the robustness of VHS, it has a solid 2 or 3 decade history at a lot of companies versus a lot of newcomers in the ESG space, something that Dan Keyser and I at ARC have spoken about and had interesting, projects that we've worked on together on. So it's, even if ESG subsumes EHS, in some ways, the guts of the system are still like the EHS depth, right? So it's kind of it's almost like a renaming. I mean, yeah.
Am I on? Hi. Hello, testing, testing. Okay, cool. So if you can all hear me, if I may, I mean, we saw when you and I were collaborating together, ESG and EHS, different parts of everything.
A bit closer to your
Oh,
mic, Dan.
sorry about that. Okay. So EHS is probably more of an operational level, and ESG we saw was more of a strategic level for that C-level suite. But where I think we have disconnect, or where one is going to subsume the other, is at the tactical level. So as Amanda mentioned, Dow is moving to a more granular approach with ESG reporting, and I think that covers that tactical level of operation in between the two. But what I want to know is, with all of your other companies here, where's your EHS reporting stopping at? When does EHS transform into ESG for you? Is it at an operational level, a tactical level, or a strategic level? And can you go vice versa?
I think you're supposed to ask us questions.
Oh,
Yeah, and you can address that also. Just it'll be interesting if your ESG or your EHS reporting functions, are they more like in the accounting side, more on the operations side? Is it like a marketing communications function, more superficial, over deeper? Anyone want to comment on?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, you flinched.
I did flinch. It's all good. Yeah. So Chris Glenn with Phillips 66. So we traditionally, each business function would report those things separately, right? So refining would report their ESG or greenhouse gas emissions different than midstream, which would be different than the corporation as a whole. We've recently stood up a new business unit called Emerging Energy and Sustainability to try to enterprise it all, right? To have a common reporting platform for, regardless of what business unit you have, how do you report on scope 1? How do you report on scope 2? How do you report on soon-to-be SEC filings from a financial perspective on all of your energy usage, et cetera? So that's how we're trying to solve that.
That makes sense. I mean, so many of the emissions reporting requirements have been in place for a long time, and you have monitoring systems, and you've been reporting stuff, right? So it's, if this is an artificial overlay, why not like have a foundation that you you define as you were describing. That's great. Any other comments or questions? Yes?
Hi, Mira. Hi, Mira Bodek with Deloitte Consulting. I work on sustainability in our smart manufacturing business. One thing I'd like to maybe ask the room about is, although not directly related in terms of metrics and KPIs, but I think included in the conversation is like equity and social impact and purpose. And I'm curious, I've seen it often in marketing materials, but I'm curious if others are seeing a trend of more firm commitment to these metrics of, representation and equity in their organization, and if it's more of a marketing approach or if you see it actually kind of being invested in the organization as a whole in the way that sustainability is.
Thank you. And that could be, the board of director demographics as well as down the management chain and all, yeah, and opportunities. Yes?
Sorry.
I can tell you for sure at Pfizer, yes, definitively I see it in action, 100%.
Yeah, I can definitely say the same in Shell. All the leadership team levels, this is a key priority every year. We continue to see growth in these spaces every day.
So
Yeah.
my name is Kevin. Hi, Kevin. Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No.
Didn't mean to. We developed out methods to track Scope 1 and Scope 2 in our software. It's enterprise asset management software in 2004, originally because of the American Recovery Act. With the Obama administration, we had a lot of utilities customers that wanted to track. We actually had one of our case studies come here and present it about 10 years ago. But they did a great job on it, and it really kind of vanished as being it was popular in at least our group. We have about 3,500 customers around the world. Pfizer's one, as an example. And they really paid attention to it, and it was really more of trying to understand how that equipment consumed energy as a function of its asset life cycle. And then it started to go into more socioeconomics. It started going into more branding and marketing, recognition and social commitments that were going into it. Then it just poof, it vanished. People were not paying attention to it anymore. We got more pull in Europe from it, probably within the last 5 to 7 years. And it's starting to come back again, which is exciting because there's a lot of ways to be able to track. As an example, perfect example on doing drones and being able to justify a drone expense versus what you would have in doing a transportation expense out to that site to be able to do something. But it's been pretty exciting to see it come back in a big way. We started to see it, I would say, in at least our customer base, probably 70 to 75% of the folks that we talk with is starting to bring it back again as a topic of consideration. Just
That's great.
that justified me coming down here to Florida. So there you go.
Yay.
So I feel like at Dow, since I've been at Dow for about 8 years, I saw an aggressive funding of inclusion and diversity almost even a bit before the aggressive funding and sustainability. And it wasn't just about the workforce, but also preparing the future workforce. So I got to be involved along with others in the room on an initiative to build a pipeline for girls in STEM in the local area in Lake Jackson, since I'm from Houston, and to really equip them with STEM knowledge. And so got to volunteer in the computer science room, and we've been doing that for a few years now. And also we had a program targeted toward underrepresented minorities in physical science majors to get them to go into analytics. And so we had like a boot camp type of thing really focused on industry to get them experience. And so Dow is investing in a lot of different ways.
Excellent.
Sorry, can I add something real quick here? Real
Yes,
fast?
go ahead, Dan.
So I'd also make the argumentation of what do you define as sustainability? So, And that's a huge problem too, because you have UN definitions, which I think is 19 or 21 goals. You have the EPA definition, which is mostly focused on the environment, if I remember it, as a block of text. So good luck getting through that if you don't have a legalese degree. And then I also kind of like the UCLA text, which is basically sustainability is an equal exchange between equanimity, economy, and environment. So what is your goal? What is your definition of sustainability moving forward? And are these goals represented up here part of that process?
He keeps asking us questions.
I tried.
Yeah,
to-
I'm terrible at this.
No, you're great, Dan, come on. You know, something that, I'm sorry, go ahead. Excellent. Hi.
Hi, my name is Meha. I am with Rockwell, and we work with a lot of end users across the industry, emerging spaces as well as existing operations. And so my angle of questioning is coming from, we hear a lot on the reporting side, and we have data from our systems that can feed into that, especially around energy usage. But then my question becomes, like when I saw the Dow architecture where you take just the metering at the fence line for your facilities, and sometimes you have integrated facilities or shared facilities, so I don't know how granular you get there, but beyond reporting, how does it fall under your teams? Who does it fall back under to look at the optimization? How are you scorecarding your facilities across the globe? This isn't specific to Dow, but just in general, anyone in the audience of, okay, reporting is one thing in our ESG reports, but then it goes down to how are you measuring? Not all sites are the same. What if certain sites are actually going backwards? Because overall, when we're reporting, we're giving a net number as a company, but how are you looking at it at a facility level, regional level? Where does that responsibility start to kind of lie in the organizations going forward?
So at Dow, we have an energy business because we also produce our own power. We have power plants for our steam requirements. And so, yeah, that's why I said that was an extreme oversimplification that I showed. But so it kind of falls on the energy business. But that being said, we know from doing more of the product carbon footprint calculations, because you have to allocate it out, yes, to the facilities, but all the way down to the product level. There's a lot of allocation rules if there's not the granular meters and instrumentation that you'd like to have. So you have to fill it in with, yes, what data is real that you have, but also what data you can allocate out. And that's really what they're responsible for. But that's a big piece of our strategy too, to get more granular and accurate data. We know that we need more instrumentation and that kind of thing too.
Again, not a data scientist, so can't give as wonderful and articulate answer as Amanda, but I can tell you that we do look at it on a site-by-site basis, and we do attempt to break it down into the appropriate bucket to make sure it's applied to the appropriate product or so.
Kevin, when you'd mentioned the initiative several administrations ago that then got dropped, it reminded me of a big study that was done back then by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where energy transition-related jobs, occupations, I should say, cross-industry occupations, there was 300 or 400 different occupations across all major U.S. industries, was studied in great detail, like which ones can be retrofitted to go from one industry to another versus what skill sets can transfer to skills needed for the energy transition. There were similar initiatives in the EU a little more recently and in England, but I think that we need to see a resurgence of that sort of thing, and how do you enable transitions to happen in an equitable way? It's a big social issue. It's not for policymakers to decide. Companies need to listen to the people in these plants that might be getting closed, like a coal plant, for example, and help them. They've invested their careers in the company. Well, how are they going to transition, right? So there's some great success stories, but there are also some big gaps that need to be filled. So it's upskilling the existing workforce as well as, to your point, Amanda, the STEM programs with the emerging workforce. These are just big challenges that are part of that S in the ESG that also needs to be comprehended. Other questions? Yes. Mic coming up. Gavin has a mic for you. Thanks.
Thank you. My question's for Amanda. While there is an ethical obligation to ESG compliance, there's also a profitability aspect to it as well. And I understand as you were discussing what you were doing with Dow, that you uncovered through recyclable materials, you were potentially able to reduce costs and increase price for these green products. Could you describe what you uncovered with the data elements, and if that has in turn assisted your executive team to transform plants or diversify into other products that could potentially be more profitable?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's been a lot of market analysis that I have not been involved in. I will say that Dow is doing to understand, like, what are people willing to pay for a more sustainable product, whatever label it has, and that's still very much in discussion, right? But I think that, I mean, we're also working on how to even certify the products and like streamline that pathway, like that is circular, biocircular. So there's a lot of work still to do. But I don't think I'm necessarily answering your question. So what was, I feel like there was a second part.
Yeah, the second part was just if your data had drive into new manufacturing products or something along those lines, and it sounds like it's on the cusp of that, but maybe not directly.
Yeah, I wouldn't say directly at this point because we're really working on building that data foundation so that we can enable, that would be another use case, I would think.
I'd like to put something out there that I find fascinating and see if anyone wants to comment on it. You get that data, and then you're in a good position potentially to differentiate a product and charge a premium because it's more green, right? But then I say to myself, oh, wait a minute. Shouldn't there be a penalty for buying the brown product rather than a premium for paying for the green one? So it becomes a question of, well, in some governmental regulatory environments, there will be a penalty for the dirty product, right? So the data doesn't have to fit the price premium use case. It could be preparing to avoid the risk of a penalty, right? So it's goodness to get that data together and like, leave it to the marketing strategists and the market itself to figure out which direction that's gonna go, right? It's pretty interesting that way.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely more of the market analysis and market insight work from a marketing commercial perspective. I'm not involved in setting price at this point. I'm just responsible for giving accurate data on what the actuals are from like a product perspective and from an asset perspective.
Excellent. I want to, where are we on time, guys? Let's see. 5:12, we have time. There was something that Sean, you and Jake and I had discussed on a call a while back. So I want to widen the conversation about data and getting better data, like having the infrastructure in terms of your system. I switched from Android to iPhone like a year ago, and it still dogs me.
Android is better.
Sorry about that. So an example I'm going to give you is not directly related to using drones and AI and machine learning, but it's in the same spirit of how do you have work management systems and other systems so that as your employees are doing their jobs, good data is going into your databases rather than data that's biased by the way humans interact. And so here's my example. And this is an actual example from a big electric utility, Entergy. So for years they had a rather simpler work management system for the field workers. And when there was an outage, from a squirrel or a bird in the electric distribution system, the worker could just check a box. And then they went into a more, sophisticated mobile, tablet, handheld solution. And there were some new environmental requirements where if you checked on the tabs bird, well, you then needed to know whether it was an endangered species or not. And if it was, there was a lot more reporting work. Well, guess what? Within 6 months of putting in that system, all the outages were squirrels. There were no birds being electrocuted on the grid in Entergy's service territory. So how do you avoid data biases like that as you build out these systems with your people using what we're creating for them, right? And I think the drone inspections and the use of ML and AI to automate some of that is very encouraging to enable us to get good data, if that makes sense. Is there a question there, Jake?
No, I would just say that, like, when you have the actual the information that is unarguable, that the importance of that kind of eliminates that possibility. So these people are working in their conditions, or let's say we provide a digital representation of a physical asset, that's an undeniable truth, right? Especially if it's, it's dimensionally accurate, it's agreed upon through the entire organization that this is the single source of truth. So I think that it takes a lot of that gray area out where there may be a way for somebody to lean towards one thing or another from an accountability standpoint that, that's eliminated. That's the that would be the the application for something that we're involved in more so directly than the other topics I know have been pretty quiet over here.
Okay, well, so basically, you have tools that enable the truth to be reported because it's not going to take more time to report the truth than to report that it was a squirrel rather than a bird sort of thing, right? Hopefully, yeah. Any other questions, folks? Well, let's join in thanking our panelists and distinguished user presenters.